This is my Rideable Minecraft pig, and in this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to build one. Also, I'm not a professional, so build this at your own risk. To build the slowest version of this project, it cost me about $300. But the price mostly depends on what skateboard you use, since that's what makes it actually move. So the faster you want to go, the more expensive it will probably be. But the price also depends on what parts you use and what parts you already have. Also, all of the parts I use, dimensions of the pig, 3D files, and everything you need for this project will be linked below. Now, before we can build it, we need to design our pig. Step 1. Picking a skateboard. To pick a skateboard, you need to figure out how fast you want your pig to go and what your budget is. For this build, I bought the cheapest one I could find. It's $150 and tops out a little under 10 miles per hour. And I also bought a second one that was around $500 that's supposed to top out at 25 miles per hour. Also, make sure the skateboard uses hub motors as it's way easier to work with. Hub motors are these where the motor is in the wheel as opposed to this where the motor is outside of the wheel. After receiving the skateboard, you'll need to take it apart. You may have to take the grip tape off to access the hidden screws. Now that it's apart, make a note of how the powered wheels are attached to the trucks. One of mine attaches like this and the other like this. But if yours isn't either of those, good luck. I would say this attachment is the easiest to work with, so try and find one like that. Step 2. Wood. I used this 1/2 inch thick plywood and grabbed 3 pieces that were 2 feet by 4 feet. Also, if you're using a different thickness of wood, take that into account for the dimensions that we'll calculate in a second. Step 3. Dimensions. Now we need to make the dimensions for our pig. I made a 3D model of the pig to make this whole thing easier for myself, and because I wanted to make sure the wheels would actually fit in the feet of the pig. I already have all the dimensions written out if you want your pig to be the exact same size as mine. But if you want a bigger one, just come up with the ratio of pixels per millimeters and scale the entire pig that way. My small one has a ratio of 35 millimeters per pixel, so I just took that and multiplied it by say 8 pixels to get the height of the pig's body. Step 4. Drawing. After figuring out the dimensions, take the wood panels and draw out the cutting lines for the pieces of the pig. Remember to take into account the size of the saw blade, so put some space in between each drawing. I also wrote on each piece what part of the pig it was, just to make it easier later on when putting the pieces together. Step 5. Steering. I used 3D printed parts for my pig and designed this whole setup, which works pretty well, and it makes it look like the pig's following the carrot. So you can just use my 3D designs if you like, and they're definitely not perfect, but they work good enough. Also, for the steering, you can probably use wood or come up with something different if you don't have or don't want to use a 3D printer. Step 6. Feet. We need a way to hold the wheels of the skateboard in the feet of the pig. I use this with 3D printed parts, but if you don't want to do that, there's definitely other ways. You're just gonna have to get creative. If you want to use my 3D designs, remember that I designed them to work with the skateboards I bought. So I have 2 versions of the feet inserts. One that work with smaller wheels where the powered wheels connect like this, and the other kind for the bigger wheels where the powered wheels connect like this. But if neither of those fit your skateboard, you might just have to design your own. Step 7. Carrot on a stick. So I already have a design for this that plugs directly into the steering system, and you can slide the skateboard controller right into the handle. Step 8. 3D print. After getting your design, start 3D printing all of the steering system parts, the carrot on a stick, as well as the wheel holders that go in the feet, so that they'll all be ready by the time you need them. Now that we've designed everything, we can actually do the fun part and build it. Step 1. Cut the wood. Cut out all the pieces on the lines that we drew previously. I used a skill saw for the big cuts and then used a 2x4 to guide the saw. I also used a miter saw for some small cuts and then a Dremel for even smaller cuts. And a lot of the edges were kind of rough and weren't cut perfectly, so I sanded them down with an orbital sander. Step 2. The body. To put the body together, I found it was easiest to start with the bottom part of the body and then put one of the side panels on and use a clamp to hold it in place. And then drill some pilot holes through the pieces and then use this countersink bit to make this divot so that the head of the screw will be flush with the body. Then finally screw wood screws into it. After putting the body together, screw the head pieces together along with the nose. Step 3. Building the feet. So the pig has 4 feet, right? The front 2 rotate and are what steer the pig, and the back are stationary, but they're the ones with the hub motor wheels. We'll start by building the front non-powered feet. If you're using my 3D printed parts, you can make these feet by sliding a 7.9mm rod through the wheel, putting a spacer here, and then pushing the rod into half of the 3D printed piece, and then pushing the other side of the 3D print on, which might require a little force. Then take the 4 pieces of wood and drill holes into the same spot as the holes on the wheel holders. Then screw 3 of the wood panels on, and finally cut out a 2x4 or another thick piece of wood that can fit snugly here. Now you want to leave a little space on the top because the way we're going to make these front feet rotate is by using this large bearing. So take the bearing and make sure there's enough space where it sticks out just a little bit from the foot, but also you're probably going to have to cut away at the walls a little bit so that the bearing can actually fit. Now we can make the rear feet. So depending on how many motors your skateboard has, you will either have 1 powered foot or 2. If your skateboard only has 1 hub motor, just make one of the feet the exact same as the foot we made before, but this time make it so that the 2x4 is flush with the top of the boards, because those ones don't rotate and won't need a bearing. Now for the hub motor foot, when using the part from the $150 skateboard, I just screwed these 3 screws in here, which secured the motor to the 3D print, which was super easy to do, and it's surprisingly strong. Then you can put the wood panels here like before and then screw it in. Then drill a hole through the middle of the piece of 2x4 so that the wires can go through it. And line up the 2x4 so that it's flush with the top of the wood panels, then screw it in place. For the powered wheels with the $500 skateboard part, I put the rod of the hub wheel into this piece and then stuck the other side of that piece on. But this one is a little bit weaker, and I actually noticed that riding around on the pig when using this motor, the motor did actually start to get loose after a while, so I ended up drilling a screw into the side of it to hold it in place better, and I never had any issues with it after that. Step 4. Attach the feet to the body. To attach the rear feet with the hub motor wheels in them, you first need to drill a hole in the body of the pig for the motor wires to go through. Then line up the foot so that it overhangs a single pixel, which for me is 35 millimeters. Secure it in place, then push the wires through the hole and drill several screws through the body and into the foot to hold it in place. Now, there are definitely better ways of securing this which are a lot stronger, but this is just how I chose to do it. After getting both rear feet on, we can attach the rotating front feet. First, mark on the foot where the screw holes of the bearing are. Then drill some pilot holes into it. Also, I would recommend placing washers over these holes and gluing them in place to put some space between the bearing and the wood later on. Now, the front feet sit a pixel back from the front of the pig, so I marked with a pencil where that was, and then placed a bearing in the center of that square, which I secured in place with screws. Next, I cut a large hole through the center of it, which will help us with the steering. Also, you're gonna want to cut a hole large enough that you can fit a screwdriver or drill bit into so that you can secure the bearing to the foot. Then place the foot over the bearing, line it up with the holes you made, and screw screws into it. This looks a lot easier than it is, but it took me a really long time actually. Step 5. Attach the head to the body. When I did this, I just put a piece of wood under the head to make a gap so that the top part of the body can slide underneath the head later on. And then I just screwed the head in place. Step 6. Steering time. Woohoo! Alright, so if you're using my steering system design, take this long piece here, shove 8mm bearings into the holes, then take this piece and shove a couple bearings into it as well. Take this big boy and shove the 100mm long rod into it. Next, take these little arms and make sure your pig's feet are pointed straight, then screw these arms into the top of the feet. You can do a quick test to make sure this is lined up correctly, and then place the turning rod thing into the smaller thing with bearings. Connect it to the rest of the steering system and mark where those holes are. Then place the top piece back on. I cut mine in half to make this easier. Place it under the pig's head and mark where the top of the turning rod piece will come out. Then drill a large hole through it, push the turning rod through the hole, push the board back in place, and then screw the turning rod in place and connect the whole steering system. I made this little handle here to test the whole thing out. Step 7, the electronics. So to attach the electronics, it's literally as easy as plugging the motors back in. Now my wires were pretty short, so I had to take this motherboard out of the housing. But if you know how to solder, you can extend your wires pretty easily, which is what I did later on when I swapped out these parts for the $500 skateboard parts. Now I never attached this electronics housing to the pig because I knew that I was planning on switching it out for the $500 skateboard parts. But to attach it, simply drill holes through the pig where the holes are on the housing and screw it together with the original skateboard screws. Step 8. Carrot on a stick. To build this, just take the 3D printed parts, remove the support material, and push the pieces together. I made mine stronger by welding the pieces together with an old soldering iron. Lastly, plug the steering adapter in here. And just like that, the build portion is finally complete and we can move on to the final step, painting. Step 1. Carrot on a stick. Sand down the 3D printed stick to help hide the layer lines a little bit. Then paint it with a primer, let that dry, and then finally paint it brown. Then I chose to hand paint on the light gray and dark gray parts of it. Then take the carrot, sand it down a little, and then paint it with a primer, and then paint it with orange. And just like the stick, I hand painted on the green part. Lastly, coat both items in a clear protective coat, then secure the carrot to the stick with a strong string. Step 2, sanding the pig. Before sanding the pig, I decided to fill in the gaps as well as the screw holes with wood putty, which didn't take too long. Then I sanded down the entire pig with a fine grit. Also, make sure that you sand down the corners a lot because that's where your legs will rest and sharp corners might hurt a little bit. Step 3, painting the pig. I started by painting with a white primer to make sure the pink will pop a little bit more. Then I coated it in multiple layers of pink paint. Now we can paint on the details. I wanted to keep it as simple as possible, so I just painted the saddle, the eyes, and the nose on. This just required a lot of patience, a lot of taping, and a ton of skill. I measured everything out to make sure that perfectly lined up with the original Minecraft pig, but you can just freehand it if you want. Finally, coat the entire pig in a layer of clear coat protective enamel. And that's how you make a fully rideable Minecraft pig in real life. Let me know in the comments if you want more tutorials like this or how I can improve these tutorials in the future. Also, if you want to see me use this pig as well as build an even bigger one that goes crazy fast, click right here. Bye bye!